Mark Daly for Task Force TV. Injustice at Every Turn was the landmark report from the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force a few years ago now. And of course, a lot of people have been reading the fact sheets as they've been coming out that delve into that report in some detail. A new one is coming out. 4 have been reprinted and updated. Jack Harrison Quintana of the Policy Institute at the Task Force has more on that now. Jack, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm very well. So line them up for me. There are 5 new, well, let's say updated and 1 new fact sheet taken out of essentially the report and focusing on key aspects of it. Tell me what they are, Jack.
Yeah, so in 2011 when we published Injustice at Every Turn, it was really the first 360-degree picture of anti-trans bias around the country. And what we really saw clearly in that report was that as bad as the discrimination was for all trans people across all demographics in all parts of the country, it was clear that on every single question that we asked consistently, trans and gender nonconforming people of color faced worse discrimination and thus had worse life outcomes because of that, and because of the intersection of racism with anti-trans bias. And that's really what led to this series of reports.
So the fact sheets themselves, let's just go through them one-on-one. And I know that we did them in partnership with some other organizations, and perhaps you'd like to name the fact sheet and the partner that we did it with.
Sure. So we undertook the entire National Transgender Discrimination Survey project in partnership with the National Center for Transgender Equality. And then since then, on each of the racial justice fact sheets, we've partnered with a people of color-led organization. So we started with the Latino-Latina report, which we did with the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. Then we did the report on Black trans and gender nonconforming people with the National Black Justice Coalition, NBJC, followed by the one that we did on Asian American, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and Pacific Islander trans and gender nonconforming people with the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance in CAPIA. And we did one just with NCTE on American Indian and Alaskan Native trans folks. And then we're rounding it out with this one coming out today on multiracial trans and gender nonconforming people in conjunction with the Transgender People of Color Coalition, which is a relatively new group by and for trans people of color.
So what were the sort of big headlines to come out of the fact sheets this time, Jack?
I think that I really focus on 3 sort of key headlines beyond just the meta piece about the way that racism and anti-trans bias play together. So the first is really about employment discrimination and the heightened levels of employment discrimination that we saw for trans people of color. And of course, employment discrimination is one of the biggest topics that we talk about in terms of trans advocacy. The second was really looking at suicide. The national rate for suicide for all people in the United States is about 1.6% of the population have attempted suicide at some point in their lives. The number that we got for the overall trans community was 41%, which is, staggering and much higher. And then for each of the communities of color, it was even higher than that. So, for example, for the multiracial folks that are the focus of today's fact sheet, the rate was 51%, so even higher than that. And it's particularly notable because for straight people of color, or particularly looking at Black and Latino folks, it's actually lower than their white counterparts. So it's interesting to see it be higher in our community because I think it really speaks to just the massive discrimination that people are facing.
So tell me, are these fact sheets going to be available in different languages? They
are. They are. So tomorrow, or from now, you'll be able to see everything in English and then the Latino-Latina fact sheet in Spanish. But we really had a focus on language access for this project because one of the key audiences for these pieces are non-trans people of color, and we've been working with those groups that we partnered with to make sure that we are getting them out in different ways to different pockets of the community. And we wanted to make sure that people were able to read them in whatever language they really speak at home. By the end of the year, we hope to have different pieces of these reports available in a number of languages, including Spanish, French, Amharic, a number of Asian American languages, Chinese traditional, Chinese simplified, Korean, Vietnamese, Thai, Khmer, Tagalog, Hindi, Bengali, and Tamil, and as well as Portuguese, which is obviously also a Latino language. Yeah, and I think the final thing that's really important to me, especially as a person of color, to sort of dispel a myth that we saw in these fact sheets and in these statistics, was that when we looked at family life, what we saw was that transgender people of color were actually more likely to be accepted by their family members, be accepted sort of in their gender identity for who they are, than their white counterparts. And I get a lot of pushback and a lot of surprise when I present those numbers out in the community, both from people of color and white folks, because people really are coming with a lot of assumptions that, black community feels this way about trans people, or sort of Latino churches, produce this kind of narrative about trans people. And I think that, people's individual experiences are very real, and what we see at the meta level with these statistics is that it's just not true that people of color are more transphobic than their white counterparts. And I think that the fact that we hold so much of that so close to our hearts is really a result of us accepting racist narratives.
The report is called Injustice at Every Turn. 5 fact sheets, 1 brand new one, 4 updated ones, and I understand with a facelift as well. Jack, thanks an awful lot for your time.
Thank you.